It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday. The kind of day where you could hear the birds chirping, the leaves rustling, and the occasional hum of a lawnmower in the distance. I had planned to spend the day in my backyard, lounging in my hammock with a good book and a glass of iced tea. But the moment I stepped outside, I knew something was terribly wrong. My peaceful sanctuary had been transformed into a chaotic circus. There were tables draped in white linen, a DJ setting up his equipment near my prized rose bushes, and a man I had never seen before carefully arranging a chocolate fountain as if it were a priceless artifact. Strangers were milling about, carrying trays of food, unfolding chairs, and laughing like they had every right to be there. And in the center of it all, standing with a clipboard like a dictator surveying her conquered land, was my neighbor, Linda. Linda was the kind of person who believed the world revolved around her. She was always hosting loud parties, parking her car in front of my driveway, and borrowing things without asking. But this was on a whole new level. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just a casual backyard barbecue. This was a full-scale event, something you'd expect at a wedding venue, not in my backyard. My backyard. My property. My blood pressure spiked as I took a step forward, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Linda, what the hell is this? Linda turned slowly, a saccharine smile plastered on her face, as if she had been expecting me, but also as if she was annoyed that I had the audacity to question her. Oh, hey, Mark, she said, waving her hand dismissively. I was hoping you'd be out later so we could avoid all this. She gestured vaguely between us, like I was the problem. I folded my arms. You want to explain why there's a DJ in my backyard? She laughed, waving her hand like I had just told the funniest joke in the world. Oh, it's just a little party. Nothing major. Just a few friends and family. You don't mind, right? I stared at her deadpan. You mean the 50 people setting up tables and food stations in my yard? She sighed dramatically, as if I was being unreasonable. Mark, don't exaggerate. It's not 50 people. Right at that moment, 2 more people walked past me, carrying an entire cake table between them. I raised an eyebrow. Linda glanced at them, then back at me, and huffed. Okay, fine. Maybe a little more than a few. But it's for my niece's graduation party, and you have such a lovely open space. It would have been a shame not to use it. I clenched my jaw so tight I thought my teeth might crack. A shame not to use it? Linda, this is my backyard. You didn't ask me. You didn't even tell me. You just took over like you own the place. Linda rolled her eyes, the way she always did when she was about to say something infuriating. Oh, come on. It's just a few hours. You barely use your backyard anyway. That did it. That did it. I felt my fingers curl into fists at my sides. That's not the point. You don't get to decide whether I use my yard or not. It's mine. Before she could respond, another voice chimed in. Excuse me, sir, you're blocking the catering setup. I turned and found myself face to face with a man in a suit holding a clipboard. He looked at me like I was the inconvenience here, like I was the intruder, like I had somehow wandered into their party and was being difficult on purpose. I slowly turned back to Linda. You hired a catering company? She had the nerve to smile. Well, yeah, it's a big event. You don't think I just serve chips and soda, do you? I inhaled deeply, counted to 5, then exhaled. Linda took that as a sign of me calming down. She was wrong. I stepped forward, lowering my voice to a dangerously even tone. You have exactly 10 minutes to pack all of this up and get out of my yard. Linda gasped, like I had just threatened to set her house on fire. Mark, don't be selfish. Everyone's already here. The decorations are up. The cake is arriving in 20 minutes. Be a good neighbor, just this once. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. A good neighbor? You mean like asking permission before hijacking someone's property? Linda crossed her arms. You're making a scene. I gestured around at the absolute circus happening in my yard. Oh, I'm making a scene? I'm making a scene. At that moment, I heard a loud screech. My head snapped toward my front lawn, where I saw a black SUV parked on my grass. The tires had dug into the soil, leaving deep, ugly grooves where there was once perfectly maintained greenery. I turned back to Linda. Whose car is that? She barely spared it a glance. Oh, that's Tony. He's my brother-in-law. There wasn't any space left on the street, so I told him he could park there. It's just grass, Mark. It'll grow back. I don't know what happened in that moment. I think something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the entitlement. Maybe it was the sheer audacity of Linda treating my home like some public park she had rented. Maybe it was the fact that she was so sure she could get away with it, just like she always did. What I do know is that I smiled. And not a normal, friendly smile. A slow, deliberate, almost EVYL smile. Linda hesitated. Why are you looking at me like that? I took a step back. You know what, Linda? You're right. I am being a little selfish. You and your guests deserve to have the best experience possible. She eyed me suspiciously. What are you talking about? I shrugged, my smile widening. Don't worry about it. Enjoy your party. And with that, I turned around, walked inside, and pulled out my phone. I opened my smart sprinkler app, scrolled to the highest pressure setting, and hovered my thumb over the Activate All button. Linda wanted a party? She was about to get one. A very, very wet one. Chapter 2, The Sprinkler Showdown. I stepped inside my house and leaned against the door, inhaling deeply. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't from frustration anymore. It was from excitement. Linda had pushed her luck one too many times, and today was the day she was finally going to learn what happens when you cross the line. I pulled out my phone and opened the app for my smart sprinkler system. It was a gift I had installed last year when I got tired of dealing with manual timers. At the time, I thought it was just a convenience. Today, it was a weapon. I scrolled through the settings, smirking as I noticed the customization options. Not only could I turn the sprinklers on remotely, but I could activate them in specific zones, control the water pressure, and even set unpredictable spray patterns. It was perfect. If I played this right, I could make it look like a complete accident at first. Linda would have no idea what was happening until it was too late. I peeked through the blinds. The party was in full swing now. The DJ was testing his sound system. Guests were settling into their chairs, and Linda was making her rounds, basking in the attention as if she were the queen of the neighborhood. A waiter walked past, carrying a massive fruit platter, and I couldn't help but shake my head. She had turned my backyard into a 5-star event space without so much as a courtesy text. But she was about to regret it. I tapped the screen, activating the first sprinkler zone, the one closest to the buffet table. It took a few seconds, but then, with a sharp hiss, the sprinkler heads popped up, and a powerful stream of water blasted into the air. It was beautiful. A direct hit. The chocolate fountain took the worst of it, chocolate flying everywhere as guests shrieked and stumbled backward. Plates of food were knocked over. The carefully arranged fruit platter was sent tumbling into the grass, and the caterer was desperately trying to shield the dishes from the unexpected downpour. I covered my mouth to keep from laughing as Linda whirled around, her face a mixture of shock and fury. She waved her arms wildly, shouting over the noise. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" The caterer frantically wiped down the ruined chocolate fountain, looking like he was about to cry. "My equipment! My food! What is happening?" Linda spun in a full circle, searching for someone to blame. She turned to the DJ, who was just as clueless, and then her gaze landed on my house. Her eyes narrowed. I ducked back from the window before she could spot me watching. I gave it a minute, then cautiously peeked again. Linda was now on her phone, probably calling someone to fix the sprinklers. Good luck with that. She had no idea the problem wasn't mechanical. It was me. I smiled and moved to phase 2. This time, I targeted the DJ booth. I cranked up the pressure and hit the button. A second later, another burst of water shot out, this one catching the DJ right in the back as he reached for his laptop. He let out a startled yelp, slipping on the wet grass and crashing into his table. The speakers let out an awful screech before everything went dead. The music cut off, Leah VYing behind only the sounds of panicked guests and running water. The silence was almost deafening. Everyone turned to stare at the soaked, miserable DJ, who was now sitting in a puddle, looking utterly defeated. Linda let out a horrified gasp. "Are you kidding me? The DJ? The music? Oh, this is a disaster." I had to bite my fist to keep from laughing. It was working even better than I'd hoped. But I wasn't done yet. Linda ran over to the DJ, offering him an apologetic smile that was so fake it could have been plastic. "It's fine. Just dry off and get the music going again. We can still save this." The DJ gave her a deadpan stare, then looked down at his now dripping laptop. "Lady, my equipment is fried." She let out a frustrated groan and turned to the crowd. "It's okay, everyone. Just a little technical difficulty. We'll be back on track soon. I nodded to myself. Time to take it up a notch. I activated every sprinkler zone except for the small area where Linda was currently standing. I wanted her to watch as her party fell apart, piece by piece. The water erupted in every direction. It was chaos. Guests screamed as they were drenched from all sides. The buffet table was knocked over completely, sending food flying into the mud. Chairs flipped as people scrambled to escape the water jets. The bounce house, which had taken up a ridiculous amount of space in my yard, started deflating under the relentless downpour, kids tumbling out of it in a heap. It was like watching a ship sink in slow motion. Linda spun around wildly, her arms raised like she could somehow stop the disaster through sheer force of will. No, 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 stop it. Somebody turn it off. One of her relatives, an older woman in a floral dress, slipped and landed flat on her back with a loud splat. A man, probably her husband, tried to help her up, only to lose his balance and land right next to her. A kid shrieked as he lost his grip on his balloon, watching it float away while his mother tried to drag him to safety. And through it all, Linda stood untouched in the one dry spot I had left. I watched her realize it in real time, her expression morphing from confusion to horror. She wasn't just unlucky. She was being targeted. Her gaze snapped toward my house, her eyes locking onto the window where I stood. I gave her a slow wave. Her face turned red, and she stormed toward my back door, stomping through the drenched, muddy mess of what had once been her perfect party. I met her at the door before she could pound on it. "You did this," she shrieked, water dripping from her hair. "You ruined my niece's graduation party." I crossed my arms. "No, Linda. You ruined it when you decided to take over my backyard without asking." She let out an exasperated noise. "You're being petty. I was going to clean everything up after. You could have just let us have this one day." I tilted my head. "Oh, you mean the way you let me have my yard?" "Yeah, I didn't think so." Her jaw clenched. "You're going to regret this." I smirked. "Doubt it." At that moment, a loud squelching sound made us both look down. Linda had taken another step forward, straight into a patch of soaked, muddy grass. Her foot slipped, and before she could catch herself, she went down hard, right into the mess she had created. The guests, many of whom were already vying, stifled laughs as she sat there, covered in wet grass and bits of ruined cake. I sighed dramatically. "Oh, Linda, you should really watch where you step." Her scream of frustration was the most satisfying sound I'd heard all day. Chapter 3, The Aftermath. Linda sat there in the mud, seething. Her fists clenched as she tried to push herself up, but every attempt to stand only made things worse. Her expensive-looking heels that had no business being on a lawn were completely submerged. The second she tried to step forward, her foot slipped again, sending her sprawling right back into the mess. It was almost poetic. The remaining guests, those who hadn't already fled in a panic, stood frozen, unsure of whether to help her or pretend they hadn't seen anything. A few of them stifled laughter behind their hands, but Linda was too furious to notice. She finally managed to get up, wiping her face with her hands, only to realize she was smearing what looked like a combination of cake frosting and wet grass all over herself. She turned on me with a look that could have set fire to the entire neighborhood. "You think this is funny?" she shouted, her voice shaking with rage. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed, giving her a slow, deliberate nod. "A little bit, yeah." She let out a strangled sound of frustration and stomped toward me, her heels sinking deeper into the mud with every step. I had to admire her dedication, really. Most people would have cut their losses and run, but not Linda. No, she was determined to come out on top, even if she had to do it covered in filth. "You ruined everything," she spat, stopping just short of my porch. "Everything. The food, the decorations, the music. Do you even realize how much money I spent on this party?" I shrugged. "Didn't spend a dime on the venue, though, did you?" Her face turned an even deeper shade of red. Before she could launch into another tirade, a loud sloshing sound interrupted us. We both turned to see one of the folding tables finally collapse under the weight of the water, sending the last few untouched plates of food splattering into the mud. A wave of sauce and soggy napkins sprayed into the air like some sort of tragic fireworks display. Linda made a strangled noise, her hands clenched into fists so tight I thought she might break a finger. One of her relatives, a man in a soaked button-up shirt, carefully waded toward her. Linda. Maybe we should just call it a day. Linda whirled on him like a storm. We are not calling it a day. We are fixing this. This is salvageable. The man gave her a long, doubtful look before glancing at the disaster zone that used to be my backyard: the mud, the scattered chairs, the ruined food, the bounce house half deflated and sagging like a sad balloon. There was nothing to salvage. Another guest, a woman holding her dripping purse like it was a dead fish, sighed. Linda, sweetie, it's over. Let's just go. Linda's breath came out in ragged gasps as she turned back to me. I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just angry. She was humiliated. And the thing about people like Linda? They can't stand losing. She took a deep breath, forcing an artificial smile onto her face. Fine, she said, her voice tight. Fine. We'll leave. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, just like that. She tilted her chin up. Just like that. We'll clean everything up first, of course. Because, unlike you, I have manners. I didn't bother to respond to that. I knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to make it look like she was the bigger person, like she was gracefully bowing out, when in reality, she had no choice. One by one, the remaining guests started gathering their things, shuffling toward the exit as quickly as they could without making eye contact. The ones who had brought gifts for the graduation party hesitated, clearly unsure whether to retrieve them or just abandon them in the wreckage. Linda noticed and let out an exasperated sigh. Just leave the gifts. We'll get them later, she snapped. I watched as they trudged toward their cars, some still soaked, others covered in mud. One woman let out a small yelp as she stepped onto the street, realizing her heels were completely ruined. Another man patted his pockets, muttering under his breath when he discovered his phone had been waterlogged. And then there was Linda, standing in the middle of it all, glaring at me like she was already planning her revenge. You're going to regret this, she said, her voice low. I smiled. Am I? She didn't answer. She just turned on her heel, nearly slipping again, and marched toward her car. One by one, the cars pulled away from the curb, Leah vying behind, only the wreckage of the worst graduation party in history. The decorations sagged under the weight of the water, bits of food floated in puddles, and the once perfectly manicured lawn looked like it had been hit by a stampede. It was glorious. I stepped down from my porch, surveying the damage like a general after a victorious battle. There was a part of me that knew I'd have to deal with the aftermath. The mud would take weeks to fully dry, the grass might not serve VYVE, and I'd probably be finding bits of soggy cake in weird places for the next month. But it was worth it. I turned off the sprinklers, the last few streams of water sputtering to a stop. For the first time that day, my backyard was quiet. Peaceful. Exactly how it was supposed to be. I took a deep breath, savoring the silence. Then, just as I was about to step back inside, there was a knock on my front door. I frowned. The guests were gone. Linda was gone. Who else could possibly want to bother me? I opened the door to find a man in a city uniform holding a clipboard. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson. I blinked. Oh, yeah. He flipped through a few pages, then handed me a slip of paper. You've been issued a noise complaint. I stared at him, completely dumbfounded. A noise complaint? From who? He gave me a pointed look. A neighbor. I didn't even need to ask. I already knew. I turned my head, looking toward Linda's house. Sure enough, there she was, standing on her porch, arms crossed, a smug little smirk on her face. She raised a hand and wiggled her fingers in a mock wave. I let out a slow breath, turning back to the city official. You do realize I wasn't the one throwing a party, right? He shrugged. Doesn't matter. You were listed as the source of the disturbance. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Unbelievable. He handed me the paper and nodded. You have a few days to contest it. Have a good day. As he walked away, I looked down at the slip in my hand, a ridiculous fine, all thanks to her. I glanced back at Linda, who was still smirking like she had just won a war. I smiled. If she thought this was over, she was wrong. I was just getting started. Chapter 4, The Counterattack. The next few days were a blur of phone calls, emails, and meetings with city officials. Linda had filed a formal complaint against me, claiming that I had intentionally sabotaged her party and caused a public disturbance. She even went so far as to claim that I had damaged her property. Apparently, her brother-in-law's SUV had suffered some mysterious scratches during the chaos. But I wasn't about to let her win. I had EVY Denke on my side. Security camera footage from my backyard clearly showed Linda and her guests trespassing on my property without permission. I had photos of the damage they had caused: the ruined lawn, the mud tracks leading from my yard to the street, and the remnants of the party scattered across my property. I presented all of this to the city officials, along with a detailed timeline of events. It didn't take long for them to realize that Linda's complaint was baseless. The noise complaint was dismissed, and I was cleared of any wrongdoing. But Linda wasn't done. She started spreading rumors around the neighborhood, telling anyone who would listen that I was a psycho who had ruined her niece's graduation party out of spite. She even went so far as to organize a neighborhood meeting to discuss my behavior. I decided to attend the meeting, if only to set the record straight. When I walked into the community center, I was met with a room full of skeptical faces. Linda was at the front, standing behind a podium like she was about to deliver a presidential address. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice dripping with false sincerity. "As you know, we're here to discuss a very serious issue. One of our neighbors, Mark Thompson, has been causing a great deal of trouble in our community." She went on to recount her version of events, painting herself as the VY Tim and me as the VY Lane. But when she finished, I stood up and addressed the room. "I'm not going to waste your time with a long speech," I said, "but I do want to show you something." I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector. The room fell silent as I played the security camera footage from my backyard. The video clearly showed Linda and her guests trespassing on my property, setting up tables and chairs, and even parking a car on my lawn. The footage of the sprinklers going off was the final nail in the coffin. When the video ended, I turned to Linda. "You want to talk about causing trouble? How about you explain why you thought it was okay to throw a party in my backyard without asking?" Linda's face turned red, but she didn't have a response. The room erupted into murmurs, and it was clear that the tide had turned in my favor. Chapter 5: The Final Showdown. Linda's reputation in the neighborhood took a hit after the meeting. People started to see her for what she really was: a selfish, entitled neighbor who thought the rules didn't apply to her. But she wasn't about to let me off the hook that easily. A few weeks later, I came home to find a notice from the city on my doorstep. Linda had filed a new complaint, this time claiming that my sprinkler system was a public nuisance and a safety hazard. She had even managed to get a few of her friends to sign a petition demanding that I remove the system. I knew this was her way of getting back at me, but I wasn't going to back down. I hired a lawyer and prepared to fight the complaint in court. But before the case could go to trial, something unexpected happened. Linda's house was put up for sale. It turned out that her husband had been transferred to a new job in another state, and they were moving. Linda tried to play it off like it was no big deal, but I could tell she was furious. She had lost the battle, and now she was VYing the war. On the day she moved out, I stood on my porch and watched as the moving trucks pulled away. Linda gave me one last glare before getting into her car and driving off. I smiled. The neighborhood was finally peaceful again. Epilogue. It's been a few months since Linda moved away, and life has returned to normal. My backyard is once again my sanctuary, and I've even started hosting small gatherings of my own with permission from my new neighbors, of course. As for Linda, I heard through the grapevine that she's still trying to stir up trouble in her new neighborhood. But that's not my problem anymore. I've learned my lesson. Sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even if it means getting a little wet in the process. And as for my sprinkler system, it's still there, ready and waiting. Just in case. The end. Vyet Teep Fan Ka Trian Vako Fan Ket. Chapter 6. The New Neighbor. A few weeks after Linda moved out, a new family moved into her old house. I was curious about who would take her place, but I wasn't expecting what happened next. The new neighbors were a young couple, Sarah and Tom, with 2 small children. They seemed friendly enough, but after my experience with Linda, I was cautious. One afternoon, as I was tending to my garden, Sarah approached me with a plate of cookies. "Hi, I'm Sarah," she said with a warm smile. "We just moved in next door, and I wanted to introduce myself." I hesitated for a moment, then took the cookies. "Thanks. I'm Mark. Welcome to the neighborhood." Sarah seemed genuinely nice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to keep my guard up. After all, Linda had seemed nice at first too. Chapter 7. The Unexpected Friendship. Over the next few weeks, Sarah and Tom proved to be nothing like Linda. They were respectful, quiet, and always willing to lend a hand. Sarah even offered to help me replant some of the grass that had been damaged during Linda's party. As we worked together in the yard, we started talking more. I learned that Sarah was a teacher and Tom worked in IT. They had moved to the neighborhood to be closer to family, and they were excited to put down roots. One day, as we were taking a break from gardening, Sarah asked me about the sprinkler system. I noticed you have a pretty advanced setup. Did you install it yourself? I chuckled. Yeah, I did. It's come in handy more than once. Sarah smiled. I bet. I heard a little about what happened with the pre-VYS owner. Sounds like she was quite a character. I nodded. That's one way to put it. Chapter 8. The community comes together. As the months went by, the neighborhood started to feel like a real community again. Sarah and Tom organized a block party, and for the first time in years, I felt comfortable joining in. It was a far cry from Linda's chaotic events. This was a relaxed, friendly gathering where everyone got along. At the party, I found myself talking to some of the other neighbors I hadn't really connected with before. We shared stories, laughed, and even made plans for future get-togethers. It was a refreshing change from the tension that had dominated the neighborhood during Linda's reign. Chapter 9. The Final Lesson. One evening, as I was sitting on my porch enjoying the sunset, Sarah came over with a cup of tea. Mind if I join you? She asked. Not at all, I said, gesturing to the chair next to me. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Finally, Sarah spoke. You know, Mark, I've been meaning to ask you something. What's that? I asked. How did you handle everything with Linda? I mean, she must have been really difficult to deal with. I thought for a moment before answering. It wasn't easy, but I realized that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even if it means making a few waves. The key is to do it in a way that doesn't make you the bad guy. Sarah nodded. That's good advice. I think we could all learn from that. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. As the seasons changed, so did the neighborhood. The grass in my backyard grew back lush and green, and the memories of Linda's party faded into the past. Sarah and Tom became close friends, and the neighborhood felt more like a family than ever before. One day, as I was setting up my hammock in the backyard, I noticed a small package on my porch. It was from Sarah and Tom. Inside was a note that read, "Thanks for being such a great neighbor. We're lucky to have you." Attached to the note was a small, hand-painted sign that said, "Welcome to the peaceful backyard." I smiled as I hung the sign on my fence. It was a reminder of how far we'd come and a promise of the peaceful days ahead. Epilogue. The Circle of Life. Years later, as I sat in my backyard watching my grandchildren play, I thought back to the day Linda had invaded my space. It had been a turning point in my life, teaching me the importance of standing up for myself and the value of true friendship. Sarah and Tom had moved on to a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, but we stayed in touch. The neighborhood had continued to thrive, with new families moving in and bringing fresh energy to the community. As I sipped my lemonade and listened to the laughter of my grandchildren, I realized that life had come full circle. The backyard that had once been a battleground was now a place of joy and peace, a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing your ground. And as for Linda, I heard she had moved to another state and was still causing trouble wherever she went. But that was no longer my concern. I had found my peace, and that was all that mattered. If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.